All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Joanne Willey, and I am the chair of the Science Education Department here at the Zucker School of Medicine. Can everybody see my screen? Are we good? Christy, is my
Yes.
screen sharing? Okay, great. Okay, so I saw that I was billed as medical school applications. Um, One of the most important things about applying to medical school is applying to schools that match your style of learning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a brief introduction to how medical education evolved the way it is now, so that you are a more informed consumer when you start looking at medical schools. I'm going to describe our medical school, and then I'm going to talk uh, about applications. So I think this is what's on here. So yeah, so let's just get started. I really want to save a lot of time for questions and discussions, because when I've given this talk, or not exactly this talk, but similar talks in the past to you guys, there's always been a lot of questions. So just a couple slides about how medical education has evolved, partly because I think it's super fascinating. So medical education didn't exist, obviously, in the United States during colonial times. It was, you really have to look to Europe for any kind of systemic, organized medical education. And um, I I would love to change the title of this slide to "Why is Columbia's medical school called the College of Physicians and Surgeons?" Because last I checked, surgeons are physicians. And I'm not sure, but I think it probably is a vestige of this old-fashioned medical education in Europe before the 19th century, when there were these academic doctors who were these so-called learned gentlemen, um, who the only actual training they got was in the preparation of herbal drugs. Um, and surgeons were actually, trained on the battlefield. And if you needed a surgeon, your surgeon was also your barber. So surgeons uh, were members of a guild. So a guild is like a carpenter's guild. It's like a trade union. So surgeons were a member of a guild, and they did most of their work on the battlefield. So things evolved such that the Surgeons Guild was ultimately eliminated, and surgeons were sort of begrudgingly pulled into the uh, sort of broader umbrella of medicine, but still weren't considered doctors. Even to this day in England, a surgeon is a mister, not a doctor in many cases. Um, and or a Ms., I should say. And there's, as we progress, there's still no practical training, or very minimal. It is absolutely not standardized. There's an increased amount of academics. Graduation remains optional. There's no examination. There's no standardization. So physicians were anything, there was this huge spectrum of people who could call themselves physicians. So clearly something had to change. And by the late 19th century and early 20th century, a few universities, and this was really driven in large part by a couple of countries, most notably the Netherlands, developed training programs. So Johns Hopkins here in the US, University of Pennsylvania, the Netherlands, Utrecht, there was a couple of schools there that were most notable. But if you were a trained physician, whatever that meant, you could actually hang up a shingle and open your own medical school. And because it was all apprentice-based, and most were 2 years long, the university ones were 3 years long. There were no exams. What you got were these tickets that served as like a certification that you went to these sessions. So in this case, lectures on surgery. Okay. all this brings us to 1910, and this is really a watershed moment in medical education worldwide. And this person, Abraham Flexner, was basically given carte blanche to go on the road and spend a couple of years just looking at how doctors were training and develop a set of recommendations that would be adopted to standardize medical training. So he did his little road show. He went around, he looked at university-based programs. He looked at these, like, random shingles hanging outside somebody's practice. He looked at, and everything in between. And what he recommended was that all medical education had to be tied to a university, that no more hanging a shingle out, and it had to be tied to a university, which was a great thought. However, many universities did not have the resources to open a medical school. So what happened was the number of medical schools decreased dramatically, and none were more negatively affected than those that trained Black men and women. So before the Flexner report, there were at least 100 different medical schools, broadly defined, for Black men. I don't know the number that accepted women, but there were many more places where women could get a medical degree. Once the university standard became required, there were only a couple left: Meharry, Howard, and there were only a couple of schools that took women. So Cornell, Pennsylvania. So this really shrunk the diversity of physicians who were being trained. Those universities that did accept women or Jewish people put quotas on it. So, 2 women out of 100, 2 Jews out of 100. Forget it if you were a person of color. So this became obviously a huge bottleneck in terms of training people of different diverse backgrounds. Nonetheless, that's the way it rolled. I'm not sure that anybody, besides the affected populations who were obviously didn't have much of a voice to begin with. Remember, at that time, women couldn't vote. I don't think Black people could vote at that point either. So, they really were disenfranchised anyway. What this left us with, nonetheless, was the classic 2+2 model, which still exists in some schools today. So when you're shopping for a medical school and you see a medical school that has the 2+2 model, you'll know that this is where it came from 1910. And you may want to ask yourself, doesn't sound very innovative to me. How are they handling this? So the way the 2+2 model worked was years 1 and 2. Year 1, you learned normal anatomy and physiology. Year 2, you learned abnormal anatomy and physiology. It was all classroom based. And then years 3 and 4 were clerkship. So that's your sort of apprenticeship piece. The USMLE was actually not started until 1992, which is a little bit surprising because it's so entrenched now. Prior to 1992, there were definitely licensure exams, but there were a variety of different licensure exams based on different states, geography, disciplines, so on and so forth. So USMLE was actually created to standardize all. So everybody who's at an allopathic, which is an MD school, takes USMLE. So enter around, well, in 2010, there was a big flurry in the literature, like, wow, it's been 100 years since Abraham Flexner. Where are we now? And people were asking really good questions, like, this 2+2 model, is it still working? Should we blur the line between this pre-clerkship years 1 and 2 and 3 and 4? Why wait until years year 3 to actually see a patient. Are lectures really the best way to learn? I mean, lectures were actually developed when you had, when paper wasn't even a thing, right? And you needed somebody to stand in front of you and read to you. Should normal and abnormal anatomy and physiology be taught together comparatively, or should we keep it separate like that year 1 and year 2 thing? Even more recently, now that step 1 is pass fail, how do students distinguish themselves, and how do we support students in developing their professional identities? These are very current topics that are the focus of a lot of discussion in the medical education community. So this brings me to our medical school, so the Zucker School of Medicine, which is your host. And our mission statement there embraces innovation and diversity and patient-centered care. And in doing so, we've sort of tipped the whole 2+2 model on its side. And rather than calling it years 1 and 2 and years 3 and 4, we call it the first 100 weeks and the second 100 weeks. And our students take one course at a time. So unlike the traditional where you're taking the first year you're taking biochemistry, you're taking physiology, you're taking anatomy, our students take one course at a time, and there are 7 courses. This has actually been split into 2. And each course has 3 different components. So there's the sort of basic science component where we do teach normal and abnormal together. So for instance, in this particular course, which focuses on cell and molecular biology, we teach the cell cycle and cell biology through cancer biology. The second component is our structure component, which is the anatomy component, but also includes other disciplines, including medical imaging and physical diagnosis, so that there is no anatomy course. You have an anatomy in every single one of these courses. And then we have our doctoring course called Patient, Physician, and Society. And then the other piece that is very different about our program is that in this very first course, students meet patients their first week because they are riding in ambulances, so that at the end of the course, they take their New York State EMT certification exam. So by the end of the first course, every one of our students is a certified EMT. And then during every course, during the first 100 weeks thereafter, students go to a community preceptor's office, so a community doc, where they're paired one-on-one, and they have specific learning objectives that they have to accomplish while they're there. So this is not shadowing. They have things they are assigned to do. And they rotate through 5 different specialties, including medicine, surgery, OBGYN, peds, and psych. So I think I just talked about that. So here's an example of a large group session. So this is what we call mechanisms of health, disease, and intervention. So that's our basic science component. A big part of our basic science component is 6 hours a week. Students are in small groups teaching each other, and this is a case-based approach to teaching. And we call it PEARLS, which is an acronym for this very long thing here that nobody can remember what it stands for. We just call it PEARLS. Then here's a picture of our structure lab. So rather than having 8 students standing around a single cadaver for however many weeks, 10 weeks, where you have 8 students and 3 of them are actively engaged and the other 5 are sort of standing around looking at their cell phones waiting for this session to be over. Our structure component is arranged in stations, and it's all small group learning. So you'll see small groups move from station to station, and each station has a specific problem, learning problem, if you will, that the students have to solve with a facilitator. So here's one of our facilitators. This woman is an anatomist on our faculty. And these are students who are sort of crowding around her in this particular station. Our longitudinal component, patient, physician, and society, includes physical diagnosis, or excuse me, clinical skills, as well as, clinical epidemiology, ethics, even health system science. So how does insurance work? How does the ACA work? And so it sort of covers a lot of ground. And here's our ambulatory clerkships include during the first 100 weeks, there's the initial clinical experience, and then in the second 100 weeks, recognizing that most of our graduates will work in the outpatient environment, they continue to work in the outpatient in outpatient clinics 1 day every couple of weeks. Interestingly, many students, you get to pick who you want to have for your preceptor. Many students go back to their ICE preceptors because they've developed such strong relationships with those physicians. The second 100 weeks is clerkship. So in the third year, the students have 6 mandatory clerkships. So there's medicine, there's surgery, psych, neurology, OBGYN, and pediatrics. And then in the fourth year, the students have electives, and then they have acting internships. And so an acting internship is really to get you ready for residency. And in an AI, we call them AIs, not that kind of AI, in an acting internship AI, the students are really functioning like an intern, but they have a lower caseload. And they have to do one in emergency medicine, and they can select either Cohen's children, so they can do it in either peds or adult. They need to do critical care, and again, they can do that in peds or adults. And then they need to do either medicine or surgery. So I asked Christy to share this with you. I'm going to switch gears now. Where are we? We are at 9:20. Good. Okay. This, if you haven't gotten this already and you're thinking of applying to medical school, this is a very short little booklet that is available online, and Christy's going to share the PDF with you. And it has a lot of really succinct, valuable information. And what this is a screenshot of one of the pages. And what I want to do is really focus on this, make a game plan, that sort of, okay, I've really decided to go to medical school. Now, what do I do? What do I do to get through the application process? Because it can be a roller coaster. It can be fraught, and students can really have a lot of questions, and that's why I really hope to spend a lot of time answering your questions. But I'll just go through a few things first. So first of all, one of the questions I get a lot is, what's the difference between an MD and a DO? So allopathic versus osteopathic. And really, there isn't much difference anymore in terms of what you can do as a physician once you graduate. The big difference is the DO schools tend to be a little bit easier to get into. Many of the DO schools are more traditional in how they present. They have, they tend to be large classes, so they do a lot of lectures, not so much small group like us. They take a different, instead of the USMLE, they take this exam called Complex, which is an acronym for something I have no idea. But they can take USMLE if they want, and most of them do, because that's their entree into residency. USMLE is obviously required of all students in an MD program, but they're not allowed to take the DO test. So whereas the DOs can take both, the MD program kids can only take the USMLE. But once they graduate, DOs can go into any discipline they want, any specialty they want. And at Northwell, we have DOs who have leadership positions. So you shouldn't look at it as less than. Just not advancing. Okay, so let's talk about application. Some of the questions. So basically, these are questions people ask me a lot. So I find this super helpful. This is a grid that basically tells you high importance, medium importance, low importance, and the things that you can and cannot control, right? I'm not going to talk about academic metrics because everybody sort of knows, you know, the better off you are here, the better off you are as an applicant. The thing that you can really control are your experiences. And so this is where you have the opportunity to make yourself stand out. So we really like to see students who have some idea of what being a doctor means. So get some kind of healthcare experience. If possible, get a physician to write you a letter of recommendation. Just make sure that the physician isn't going to say something like, well, I don't really know this person, but they seem like a nice, they seem very nice, and I think they would do fine. Make sure it's somebody who really knows you. We want to see community service and volunteer experience. We want to see experience with underserved populations. We want to see that you are capable of thinking about the world writ large. And we like to see that you have sort of put yourself out there and exposed yourself to different cultures, different experiences. Now, since the affirmative action Supreme Court decision came down, a lot of schools are very, timid about the whole what's going on demographically. Please know that if you have a story to tell here, that you come from an underserved background, it should be in your application somewhere, and probably a good place to put it is in your personal statement, because no doubt that is part of your identity. So don't be shy. Get that out there. I'm gonna go a little bit further here. Developing your personal statement. So you need the thing you need to work the most on is your first sentence, because you've really gotta. So people like me read, I'm not even on I'm on the admissions committee, but I only read the people that I interview. There are people who read even more applications than me, and I can't even imagine. Like, I don't even know how many personal statements I read every fall and early winter. And if you don't catch me or people like me in that first couple of sentences, we're going to just scan the rest of it. We're not going to read it word for word. I'm telling you right now, because we just read so many of them. So you really want to catch the reader, make them want to read the rest. So this is just sort of, think about what.
That is an idea, a deep sense of doing right.
You want to figure out what works for you. You want to be, what sounds like you. So you can look at these, these and try different things out. Spend a lot of time on your personal statement. So you want to be, and your personal statement is personal. You want it to be, you want to talk about specific examples. You don't want to just say things like, I have a lot of empathy for people, and I know that that's important for being a doctor. You want to show how an example of your empathy. Here's another: eliminate words that aren't part of your normal vocabulary. We can, it just sounds silly. Go through when you're done and see how many times you use the word I. And if it's I, me, that's a red flag. You want to try and get calm that down a little bit, because although this is about you, you don't want to sound like an egomaniac. Avoid cliches. Use an active voice. So I think I just contradicted myself, said, don't use I and me all the time, but use an active voice. It is possible to do that. It's just going to take some practice. So here's some, the hardest part is sitting down and just getting started. And I would say just, the tyranny of the blank page, just sit down and do some stream of consciousness. You can take these questions and start answering them. So anything but what, these are important. Anything that is a hardship, a challenge, an obstacle is something that you really want to put out there. A lot of students talk about their first interaction with a health crisis, which is their grandparents. So if you're going to talk about a grandparent, you need to, I would say, you need to find a compelling angle. You need to talk about that grandparent before you say, when I was 7, or when I was 15, after taking care of my grandpa, he died. You need to talk about what that grandparent taught you, why it was such a big deal for you. Because remember, you're dealing with a lot of students who are writing about the same obviously not the exact same experience, but having a grandparent die. Let me see, what else do we have here? So yeah, stay focused, just which is just, stay on topic, stay focused. Make sure, what's really nice is if the first paragraph starts with some kind of message and you can sort of pull that together at the end. So there's sort of a nice package, if you will, to your personal statement. If you're at a school that has a writing program that offers services, don't be shy. Go ask them for help. I am I hate that I have to even say this, but proofread it. If there is improper grammar, spelling, or punctuation errors, it pretty much doesn't matter what the rest of your application looks like. You have now disqualified yourself, because what this says is that you did not take the time to proofread one of the most important documents, of your life. So, have 8 people proofread it. Like, do not submit something with proofreading errors. And the same goes with your secondary essay. So the secondary essay is sort of interesting. Some students don't take the secondary essay as seriously as their personal statement, which is a big mistake because a secondary essay is shorter. So oftentimes, if somebody on the admissions committee decides to just, they're not really enamored with the way your personal statement is starting, they'll skim that, they'll go to the secondary essay, it's shorter. If the secondary essay is compelling, they'll go back and finish reading the personal statement carefully. So the secondary essay is just as important as your personal essay. Make sure it is really specific to that school. Do not use words like your school or medical school or this medical school. Like, name the school and just make sure you have the right name of the school. Don't, be careful with your copy and pasting. So give specific information, if you can, about that medical school. Like, I really like this, and then name the component of the curriculum that you like. So we have students who will say, I worked as an EMT. I would be super, they don't say super excited, but, they talk about the EMT program that we have here. So find something in that school that really, is compelling to you and include that in your secondary essay to make it clear to the admissions person that you took the time to do your homework. You're not just applying, to every medical school in a certain geography or that takes a certain MCAT score or whatever, that you did your homework, you know what their school is about, you're really interested. if you get an interview, so let's say you know, you did well enough on the MCAT, your GPA is good, you've got those great experiences, you spent a lot of time perfecting your personal statement, your secondary app, you get the interview. After the interview, send a thank you note. You don't have to send a thank you note to every single interviewer. You can send it to, if the school has an MMI, multiple mini interviews, you could just send it to the admissions dean or to one or two. You don't have to send it to everybody. You can if you want, but send a thank you note and make sure that the thank you note has the right name of the school. That's happened. I've gotten thank you notes. I would be so excited to attend Cornell University in the fall. Whoops, don't do that. Now let's say you've interviewed at 4 schools and you really, really want to go to one of them. Like this is your super top choice. You can send what's called a letter of intent. And what that school says is basically, I enjoyed being interviewed. I have researched your school deeply. If I am accepted, I will attend. If you've already been accepted at other places and you're still waiting to hear from your top school, you say, though I have been accepted at other medical schools, you are still my first choice. Now, why is a letter of intent important? So a couple years ago, AMCAS changed their rules for admissions deans, and you don't need to know how the rules were changed, but just suffice it to say that it's less transparent from our end as to what students' intentions are. It's very tricky. If we wind up with a class of 99 students, which means we have to over accept by some percentage, right? So if we just accept 99 students, not all of them are going to come, right? So it's this really kind of crazy math problem as to how many extra students do you accept to get your class of 99. Admission deans are more, all things being equal, if I'm an admissions dean and I have 4 students sitting in front of me who are all academically, all roughly equivalent in terms of all the things that the criteria that I hold, important in my application process. And one of them says, if you accept me, I will come. That's the one I'm going to accept. And the other 3 I'll put on the wait list. So letters of intent are super important but you can't go back on it. Like you can only submit one letter of intent to one school, and then you have to follow through. How'd I do on time? Ooh, 9:36, yay. Okay, so can we go into gallery view so I can see some people?
Yes.
I'm gonna stop sharing. Or you're gonna stop sharing? Yeah, so let's, if you're brave enough, you can turn your, can they go into gallery view or is this webinar?
It's webinar style.
It's webinar style. So, okay. So Christy's going to help me with the chat. So here I am.
All right.
Ask away.
So one of the questions that they have is what the support system looks like for medical students, and also if you could touch on what that looks like for first gen and low income students.
So, I mean, I can only talk about the Zucker School of Medicine. I've been here for like 14 years now. So I don't, I'm not really up to date on what other schools are doing. So we have support system. So we have academic support and we have sort of personal support. So we have an Office of Academic Success, which helps students regardless of whether they're having academic difficulty or they're just having trouble adjusting to medical school. Adjusting to medical school is no joke. I mean, it's a big, I like to tell students, look, the content isn't that difficult. Yes, you will find some content that's hard to understand, but you'll get there. The thing about medical school is the volume. It's kind of obscene. It's that classic drinking from a fire hose kind of situation. So we have an Office of Academic Success that helps students with time management, with study skills. We have a learning specialist, so we have all that in place. At the Zucker School of Medicine, because we have a Department of Science Education, so this is something that you'll see in the newer medical schools. The older medical schools don't have these departments. What a Department of Science Education, or whatever it's called, its equivalent elsewhere, means that it has a group of faculty whose primary responsibility is teaching. So we are on site all the time, open door policy. You can come see us, talk one-on-one. As far as personal levels of support, we have obviously a student affairs office. We have a wellness program. We have counseling through Hofstra University, as well as counseling through Northwell. So there are, depending on your need, we have resources to support you, and we take it very, very seriously.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Those are some great resources. Um, Another question that somebody has is about the main purpose of having the students do their EMT certification while they're attending.
Yeah, so what's the purpose? So the purpose is, one, we want students from the get-go to understand that 21st century medicine is a team sport. Gone are the days, that first slide with those doctors who all thought, I'm God. No, you're God. No, I'm God. No, no one's God. We are all on a team here, and we're all working together. So the first thing is to understand how healthcare teams work. The second is, and this is something that our fourth years, when we asked the fourth years to reflect on the EMT program, this was something that we didn't even think about at the time, but the fourth years felt is very, very important. It's the only time they get to see patients in their home environment. And then the last thing is, before we send you into your initial clinical experiences, those one-on-ones in the offices, we want to make sure it's not a shadowing experience, right? We have a class of 100, which means we have 100 preceptors. It's really hard to convince 100 preceptors that first-year medical students shouldn't be shadowing. But when those first-year medical students are EMTs with a certification that say, I can save a life, I have these skills, I have been signed off by the state of New York. It's sort of like the good housekeeping of approval, a seal of approval. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it used to be a thing. But it's like this, it's like the seal of approval. Like, yes, you can trust this student to take a blood pressure, to take some vital signs, talk to the patient. The student is not, is not a complete neophyte. The student has some skills. So that's sort of where we sit on that. Yeah.
Sure. Um, Another question, a lot of them are asking about the cost of medical school, if you offer scholarships, just anything
Yeah.
about costs.
So the cost of medical school really depends on whether you go to a public university or a private school. So if you are a New York State resident, then you comply to the SUNY system, and Cornell is also considered if you're a New York State resident, you get a break. For private medical schools, so you probably know that NYU is free. Columbia is debt free, I think, is what they if you need, you don't have to borrow money. Those schools are extremely competitive. You really need at least a 520 on your MCAT to get in, and a GPA, and I don't know, you have your extracurriculars have to be off the chart. They're very, very competitive, obviously, because they're free. At Zucker School of Medicine, we have a scholarship fund that is need-based, not merit-based. So we do our best. We if you're in, if you get accepted, we will try to make it work for you. We are sort of on the lower end of the expense, how much it costs. I don't want to give you an exact number because I don't know what it is for this coming year. But we're on the lower end for a private school. Yeah. But we do have financial aid for sure. In fact, the Zuckers who endowed us tied all their money to scholarship. We're not allowed to use it for anything else.
Gotcha. Okay. Follow up to that question about scholarships. Somebody had asked if scholarship was available for international students.
Yeah, that I don't know. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't answer that one. Yeah.
Um, for
I think I think as long as you're a legal US resident, it's available.
Right. Whoever asked that question, I'm sure if you look on their website, you could see specifically for each med school if that's something that is a part of their med school. Another question, I guess kind of going into non like New York or US.
Mhm.
Some of them are asking if or somebody is asking if Zucker School of Medicine accepts Canadian applicants, and if so, do the prerequisites mean the same?
So we have had Canadian students, but you have to get you have to get either a J visa, like you have to work through immigration. Like so, however that works, yes, we do accept Canadian students, but you have to have the visa process, ensured.
And a lot of students are asking about what makes their application stand out, like through, I guess, extracurriculars, volunteer work, just
Yeah,
what.
this is a really good question, and I get it a lot. So the first thing I want to tell you is do not be a box checker, right? So when you go into your AMCAS application, it's going to ask you how many hours you spent doing each activity. So let's say I have two applicants in front of me and they look the same in terms of their demographics, their GPA, their MCAT, and applicant A has spent 10 to 25 hours doing, 8 different things: food bank, clothing drive, who knows, like. And applicant B has spent 400 hours working for, one particular nonprofit. I'm going to look at applicant A as a box checker who really didn't, was just, okay, I did my food bank. Okay, on to the clothing drive. Check that one off. Okay, now I got to do the hospice. Okay, I got my 12 hours at the hospice done. Like, yuck. I'm going to be much more drawn to the person who has invested a big chunk of their time to some organization or process or, charity, whatever you want to call it, that they feel passionate about. And also, by the way, when you go to interview, you're going to be able to talk about and say, this is why I'm passionate about it. For instance, I had a young woman who just graduated. I remember interviewing her, right? And then she came to our pre-matriculation program. I mean, wonderful, and she was, I don't know, she's had some kind of like finance job or some kind of non-medical job, but every weekend she was out on Rikers Island teaching English for like 3 years. I mean, that's amazing, right? So that's the sort of thing you want to do. You want to find something that's going to not only make you look good, but give something back to you that's going to enrich your life. Working 12 hours at a food bank and then 12 hours at the clothing drive and then 12 hours at the hospice is not going to enrich your life. But giving a piece of yourself to some nonprofit is, and that's what we're looking for.
Right, for sure. Somebody also asked about how the likeliness of a person with a low GPA but a high MCAT score, but having good like experiences. I guess what your take is on that in
So
terms of.
yeah, so that's so we know, sadly, I wish it weren't true, that the MCAT score is a better predictor of success in the first year, and also is a pretty, reasonable predictor of how you're going to do on step one. It just means, yes, you can take multiple choice tests. Yeah. If you're, I don't know what you mean by low, but I would say anything below a 3.4 is going to be eyebrow raising. In that case, I would say the best thing you could apply now. You won't get into a top tier medical school. You would not get into this medical school. If you are interested in going to a top tier or, top, let's say a top 20%, top 30% school, I would say take a year and take some classes and get straight A's and just show that it's possible. Show that, look, I'm perfectly capable of getting straight A's. I can, because what we worry about with somebody with a low GPA and a high MCAT is that they're the classic underachiever, that they're not putting in the time to study. And it doesn't matter, how smart you are. There's a ton of memorization in medical school, and there's no way it doesn't matter how clever you are. You have to put in the time. And so we need to see evidence that you're able and willing to put in the time.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Somebody had asked about overcoming, I guess, the red flag, quote unquote, of an extra attempt in step one. I know the medical students who had talked with us on the first day had kind of talked about a little bit about Zucker's process about maybe having to retake step one, if you want to talk about that.
So yeah, we at our school, if you fail step one twice, then you are excused. And basically it's because you're not going to get it's almost impossible for you to get a residency at that point. So it's better for you to just sort of go on to plan B and make a new, do something different with your life. It's actually worse now that it's pass fail, because when it wasn't pass fail, at least people could see, oh, you missed it by 3 points. Now it doesn't matter whether you missed it by 1 point or, 70 points. We have no idea. So a fail is bad. 2 fails is catastrophic. I can't sugarcoat it. Yeah.
For sure. There's a lot of questions about gap years and
Mhm.
what that looks like in applications. Somebody had asked if you would recommend taking a gap year to do an MPH or an MBA degree. Just, I guess, what your take is on gap years.
So 75% of between 70 and 75% of our students have taken at least 1 year. And that's pretty typical nowadays. I would say don't do an MPH or an MBA unless you want to be an MPH or an MBA. Like, don't do it just to do it. If you are like that person who had the low GPA and the high MCAT, doing an MPH or an MBA is one way of proving that you can, get straight A's, but it's not, only if that's what you want to do. There are a million things you can do during your gap year besides go to school. And many of them, are more enriching. So, and we have, people from all sort of everything from, the sort of classic Peace Corps to working for a drug company as a sales rep to working on Wall Street to, so, whatever you want to do, you should try to make it, if you're really planning on applying to medical school during your gap year, you should try to make sure that it has some overlap with the medical field. So scribing is always popular. Doing research, if that's what, floats your boat. And it doesn't have to be bench research. It can be community research. It can be public health research. Working for biotech, we've had people who have spent a year working on, apps, health apps. We've had people who've worked in, government, public health, different, public health jobs. So yeah, doing a gap year is always, it never, I would say it never hurts. It always helps.
Yeah, for sure. Somebody also asked about if applying to an MD school, but my letter of rec is from a DO doctor.
It's
Does
fine.
that?
Absolutely fine.
All right. And then there is another question about if you could explain a little bit more about the letter of intent.
So you can actually look these up online, and there's, if you just, Google letter of intent medical school, and then there's also something called a letter of interest, which is sort of where you're not pledging to go there, but you're just saying, I'm very, very interested. And you can get a nice description. And there's even like example, I think almost like templates that you can use. But basically, as I mentioned, it's a numbers game for us. Like right now, we still have seats to fill, right? And our school, we start in like less than a month. We start on August 5th, and we're still like, ooh, have a couple seats to fill. So we are, at that point where, you know, obviously this is very late in the game, but let's say it's March, right? And let's say we have 80% of our seats filled, and it's now time to go into our waiting list. And remember, to be on the waiting list is not, it is not denigrating you in any way. We get 6,000 applicants for 99 spots, so it's, anyway, so if you submit a letter of intent, it increases the odds that you will be accepted, all things being equal. As long as everything else about you is acceptable, it increases the odds that you will get an offer.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the bottom line.
For sure.
Just don't forget to send a thank you note.
Yes, those are important. Speaking of like timing, there was a question about if it looked bad to submit your application later than
No,
like most.
it doesn't look bad. It just makes it harder to get in,
Yeah.
because medical schools typically have rolling applications. And so we start accepting students around Thanksgiving. So by the time January comes, we've accepted way more than 99 students. So now our buffer of how many more students that we can accept is smaller. So that makes the competition tighter or tougher, right? So the earlier you apply, the better, because you're starting sort of with this blank slate of we've accepted no one, right? So we have a big pool of applicants that we want to pull from and start filling our bench. But once that bench gets full, get the fuller that bench, you guys got it. I don't need to keep beating a dead horse here. Applying early. So if you apply late and you don't get in, get your application in early next cycle. Submit it in whatever it is, the earliest you can submit it, July, whatever it is. Get it in there as soon as AMCAS opens.
So takeaway, brain turns, make sure you're submitting your applications early on.
Yeah.
Somebody was wondering if you could talk more about the interview process of Zucker, if you guys do individual interviews or panel interviews.
So we do individual interviews, but we have sort of a hybrid. So ours is all online. We feel that that's much fairer than having to, for a variety of reasons. And we do the multiple mini interviews, which are these little scenarios students get. It's usually some kind of ethical dilemma, or some way that prompts you to talk about your character. And you have you read it for 2 minutes, you read and think about the prompt for 2 minutes, then they put you in a Zoom room with an interviewer. You have 7 minutes to respond to the prompt. So we do six rooms. I don't even know why I don't know this, but we do a bunch of rooms of those, 5 or 6 rooms like that. And then you have 2 20-minute interviews with one-on-one with a physician or somebody on the faculty. So we do the sort of hybrid MMI one-on-one. Different schools do, there are panel interview, different schools do it differently. Panel interviews, a lot of schools are doing MMIs, just MMIs. So yeah, you should definitely when you get an invite to interview and you accept the invite to interview, make sure you understand, go to the school's website, make sure you fully understand the interview process at that school before you jump in.
For sure. Another question was about if a student has to finish their prereqs as an undergrad at a community college rather than their university due to financial reasons, what that would look like or how you take that into account.
So first of all, I would explain that in your application somewhere, probably your secondary app. Say that the reason, because there are skeptics on the admissions committee who will say, oh, well, this person is doing the prereqs at community college because it's easier to get an A. They'll accuse you of gaming the system. So make sure you make it very clear that it was a financial decision that drove, your attendance at community college. Is super important. Then it is what it is, period. It's going to be it's going to make your road a little harder, but I would say as long as you explain that this decision was driven by financial considerations, that you're not trying to game the system, don't say that, but as long as you make it very clear that was what was driving the decision, then, yeah. Ask yourself, do you want to be at a medical school where people don't understand, that the reality is that, not everybody has the kind of wherewithal to attend a private university and get a fancy degree.
Well, yeah, for sure. Well, our time is wrapping up, but I don't know if you have a piece of advice, wisdom that you just want to give our students.
So, I know there's a lot of online chatter about medical school, applying to medical school, and I would just say you can really make yourself crazy reading all that stuff. And I would say just take a step back, take a careful evaluation, try to be as, objective as you can about your own situation. Find one person you trust, either a counselor or a faculty member, somebody that you trust who will help you go through your application, and be realistic about it. Okay, I got a 508 on my MCAT and I have a 3.7 GPA. This isn't, I'm not going to get into Harvard, but I'm going to take a gap year. I'm going to do something really, related to, medicine. I'm going to spend a lot of time working on my personal statement, and I'm going to get into a school that accepts these metrics. So just be realistic about it, and, you'll be fine. Don't make yourself crazy. Don't spend a lot of time on Reddit and all these other sites where people are giving all kinds of crazy advice.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and taking time out of your schedule.
Yeah, sure. No, I enjoyed it. So
everyone could please say thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just want to say, all of you who are applying, good luck. If it's what you really, really want to do, stick with it. Just, like I said, be realistic, and yeah, maybe we'll see some of you here. All right. Take care.
Thank you so much, Dr. Willey. We
Sure.
appreciate
Okay.
everything.
Sure. Okay. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.